My name's Luc Dubois, and I'm a composer and artist living in New York City. And we are sitting in my office at the Brooklyn Experimental Media Center, which is part of the Polytechnic Institute of NYU in downtown Brooklyn. That work?
Sure.
Great. There's a thing about the way I sort of artistically started playing with time and information is a lot about memory and how memory works culturally. So like I started out originally just working with sound. I had this piece I did called Billboard, where I took all the #1 songs and kind of came up with this thing I call time-lapse phonography. It's basically like a long exposure way of smushing sound. You aggregate all the frequencies, makes this big ambient blur. And it was all based around this idea of like, what's the sound that's ringing in your ears? Not literally, but in your sort of mind's ear. When you leave a musical experience, like is it the first sound you heard? Is it the last sound you heard? Is it the bit where you spilled your drink on your girlfriend? Like what is it? And is it this kind of like gestalt impression of the sort of sonic experience? And so I was trying to figure out a way to make that sound, which is kind of folly. Everybody's perceptual apparatus is different, obviously, but like that was sort of the closest I got. Like maybe you hear this kind of drone, this kind of like echo of everything. So I was trying to do that, you know, and that got me kind of on this whole kick about, you know, cultural memory and how cultural memory works, or how romantic memory works, or how information can be accelerated for emotional impact, like the Hard Data piece is based around that. Yeah, let's see you. Okay. What was really nice about working with Mivos is they're really young, they're really energetic. They humored me a lot in sort of me explaining to them the sort of emotional tenor that I wanted to describe, something that you can't really notate or articulate. So they were really fun. They were really like great to work with because of that. I really like appreciated the effort they put into it, that I definitely wouldn't have gotten out of just, you know, an older kind of professional ensemble where they just kind of wanted the notes on the page. So Hard Data was commissioned by something called Turbulence. I was going to do this kind of open source score thing where I would take all this information from the Iraq War, casualties, oil revenue, you know, congressional money spent, any kind of thing the New York Times would plot on a graph, basically, whatever that might be. Turn it into some kind of really easy to access and understand kind of database for composers, put it online, make my own version of maybe an electroacoustic work of it, and then try to get people I knew or people I didn't know to make their own realizations of this piece, of this kind of score, right? Which didn't quite work. I made my own version. I made this really nice little Flash website where I like show all this stuff. It's still up. It's very cool. Not that many people like took the bait, and the reason why I wanted to do it as kind of this concept piece was I don't own that data at all, and I thought it might be interesting to see how other composers sort of evoke that information, what that sounds like to them. What is the sound of loss? What is the sound of, you know, 3,000 soldiers dead? What is the sound of tens of thousands of civilians dead or missing or whatever? What is the sound of oil was the sound of money going down the drain. But nobody kind of took the bait. So that was a drag. But what I did was I decided to make a slightly different riff on it for string quartet, where the flaw in the piece is there's too much information. In the original idea, I was literally like sonifying every possible metric of the Iraq War and going really rigorously, like 1 second a day for so it was like this 45-minute sound work where all this crap was going on and you had no idea what anything meant. So I decided to do something much simpler where I just take these metrics of casualties, sort of, dead men, women, and children, soldiers, people who'd been displaced and people who are missing. Take that over the span of the war, crunch it down to however long I felt the movement needed to be, like 7 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. And then just do this thing where, as those numbers change, rotate through the notes or the music, essentially. Maltini, which is a Palestinian folk song that Iraq is using as their national anthem. And that's how I made that piece. I used to play in a band called the Freight Elevator Quartet in the 90s, and I used to play these old analog synthesizers, things that look like phone switchboards. And what happened was these gizmos were not really tour ready, so I would play these shows in clubs, and things would happen, depending on whether the light switch was on in the bathroom, the entire system would slow down and drop in pitch. And that wasn't really acceptable. I couldn't really kind of contain that kind of stuff. And so I decided to switch to a laptop for performance in the late 90s. And a software package that had been out for a really long time called Max, which is a visual programming environment. Sort of a bunch of boxes and you hook them up and it does stuff. They had just come out with an add-on package for Max called MSP. That let you do kind of real-time audio, so you could make your own synthesizer in the computer and use it in real time and perform with it. So I got kind of hooked on it, and as I got more involved in it, I started working with that program to try to come up with a way to do imagery as well in real time. And some of the other people at the company were interested in as well, and the main sort of instigator of the project, a guy named Joshua Kit Clayton, decided that we were going to write another set of extensions to this language, and it's called Jitter, to let you do kind of real-time video and 3D and graphics and all this kind of stuff. So I was one of the programmers of it. Since then, yeah, it's been used all over the place. It's a really fun way of learning to program, because it's less like learning a programming language than learning a foreign language. You basically memorize the names of a bunch of boxes and what they do, and you hook them up. You don't have to understand any intricacies of coding or compilers or anything like that. It's fairly simple. And so it's really good for education. Yeah, you can make installations with it. You can make live performance systems with it. You can make all sorts of crazy stuff with it. So I've been using it for a long time. Copyright law as it stands in the United States, and in the way in which it would be like rigorously implemented, is sort of, you know, pointless and artistically stifling. At what point is something like just complete cultural currency that you can't, can you really be accused of sampling it? You know, is it, you know, and that, I don't know, I did this piece called Academy. The one piece I did where I completely expected to get into trouble was I did this piece where I took every Academy Award Best Picture and sped it up to 1 minute and strung them all together. I did it for the Sundance Film Festival, 2007. So it's like 75-ish movies in 75 minutes, right? So it's like, you know, no matter how long the damn movie is, you speed it up, string them all together. And so it's like you see this sort of, it's nauseating and kind of unwatchable, but you get this whole like kind of history of American cinema, right? And I thought I thought it was gonna be like, you know, one of these situations where it was like, in a stunning display of industry solidarity, every movie studio sues me. You know what I mean? That's completely what I was expecting. Nobody cared. Everybody thought it was really like an homage. They thought it was like cute. You know, they were like, oh, this like weird artist. You know, and a couple of the people who collected the work are film people. They thought, I think it's like really kind of cool. But then I tried to do something a little bit similar with Playboy, and I got sued, you know, because they have a kind of hermetic brand kind of that they really need to protect. You know, it's like Disney, right? And Disney is even worse with like trademarking, right? It's like, that's why, you know, Disney has to, trademark you have to protect, right? So like Disney sues children's hospitals when they put up Tinkerbell stickers, right? Because they have to, because if they don't, then a snarky artist like me does something weird with Tinkerbell, and I can have a legal argument that they weren't protecting their copyright because all these children's hospitals use Tinkerbell, right? You can like sort of make that case. So it's this really tricky thing with like legal rights and all this kind of junk, and it's, eh.
All right. Okay, so I'd like to. No, I just switched. Oh, you switched it. Okay.
Fair Use is a trio that I started in 2005-ish with a guy named Matthew Ostrowski and a guy named Zach Layton. These two friends of mine who are electronic musicians. And the conceit of the performance is that we take a piece of media, usually a Hollywood movie, and we play it back as we remember it. So, which is to say, rather than taking an hour-and-a-half long film and playing it for an hour and a half, we really only linger on those like 2 or 3 scenes that really had an impact on us and just blow past the rest of the movie. Or blur it, or, you know, shuttle it in some weird way. You know, so moments that especially linger we'll fast forward and rewind a few times and revisit. And the idea is that as a trio, it's set up a little bit like the the way you do a sound mix in cinema. So I have the dialogue, Zach has the soundtrack, his music, the non-diegetic music, the sort of score, the soundtrack album. And Maddie has the Foley, he has all the weird noises and sound effects and stuff. And it's an improvised kind of set. Depending on the movie, we'll make a complete mess of things, or we'll really rigorously kind of rehearse and say, okay, in this scene, everybody needs to play like that part from this scene, and we'll kind of orchestrate it. Totally depends. It's really fun to do. It's an interesting way of looking at movies, but it's, you know, it's just like a lot of the sound work I do. It's about memory. It's about how we consume media and remember media and trying to sort of re-inject that.
We're here looking at a new project of mine called A More Perfect Union. And we're at Bitforms Gallery, which is in Chelsea on 20th Street. This show opened a few days ago. And it's almost entirely a works on paper exhibit. But it's based on a big computer thing that I have been working on for about 2 years now, where I decided to make a census of the United States in a kind of peculiar way. So 2010 is a census year, so I decided to make my own, and what I decided to do was make it based on online dating sites. And so what I did was I joined 21 different online dating sites as a straight man, a gay man, a straight woman, and a gay woman, and downloaded about 19 million single Americans, stuck them all on a hard drive, sorted them by zip code, and subjected all their words to analysis. And then what I did was I made a road atlas of the United States. I took an old Rand McNally and I scanned it into my computer and I traced it by hand and traced all the borders and the rivers and the lakes and the highways and stuck in all the towns. And then I replaced the names of all the towns and cities with the word used by a higher percentage of people in those towns and cities than anywhere else in the country. So all the words are unique. There's about 20,000 unique words in the whole atlas. And some of the words are sort of banal, like New York City is now, and Washington, D.C. is interesting. And it ranges from that to sports teams, you know, so Phoenix, Arizona is Diamondback, that makes sense, or Kansas City would be Chief. But you also get things like capital of Alabama being conservative. So it's kind of all over the place, and it's not the kind of thing that I really want people to read into in a literal sense. Like, I don't want people sitting there with a roadmap being like, what's my hometown's word? You know, it's a little bit more complicated than that. What I'd rather people do is think about what those words say overall about an area, and what they say about us is in terms of how we describe ourselves and how we choose our vocabulary, because online dating is this very kind of complex and subtle activity. You have to be able to write about yourself for the express purpose of people liking you, people wanting to ask you out. And so you usually do 2 paragraphs. You usually do one where you lie, where you talk about yourself, and then you do one where you tell the truth, where you talk about the person you want to be with. The official U.S. Census, which also happened this year, looks at things like how much money you make, or how many people live in your household, or what kind of industry you're employed in, or your ethnicity. And really, that's an interesting body of data, and that's useful for all sorts of things. But it's not really telling us who we are. It's not really telling us anything about the personality of Americans, or what we like to do on a Saturday night, or who we want to fall in love with. So I wanted to take it in a more whimsical direction, but also on the serious side, a more thoughtful direction about how we accumulate a vocabulary for describing ourselves and where that comes from.
I started playing with time as a way to play around with cultural information and cultural memory, and that spawned a whole bunch of work that I was playing with about how to track the history of a thing in our culture by accelerating it. So like, take every #1 song, speed it up. Take every Academy Award Best Picture, speed it up. What other kinds of things can you speed up or slow down or whatever? But being shown an event at a different or unusual kind of time scale makes you pay attention to it as a type of kind of phenomenon in and of itself, if that makes sense. So like, if you time lapse like all the traffic going in the city, coming up and down and whatever, the reason why people find that compelling is because it makes them pay attention to the sun and the flow of traffic, all these kind of macro scale things that you can't see at normal time. Similarly, when you do that whole like kind of slowing down thing where you shoot the bullet through the orange or whatever, right? It's a different, it's a perceptual kind of indicator of how we think about things. But it's also a commentary on how, we're always running out of time. We're swamped with information. We have a kind of cultural ADD. And so we actually consume things at a faster pace than we would normally anyway. We're already doing this. If you watch how people use their iPods, I love this, right? People are obsessive compulsive with their iPods, or they're either obsessive, they play the same song over and over again, or they're compulsive, they can't get through the first chorus without skipping to the next song. Everybody does one of these two things, right? Nobody sits with their iPod on lock and listens to the complete record. So, that's weird, or I think that's interesting anyway. Fashionably Late for the Relationship, which is a piece I did with Leon Amaris, who's a performance artist, in 2007, was about playing around with time and public and private space and gender relationships and romance. Okay, so what it was she did a self-directed performance, 3 days long, on a traffic island off of Union Square in New York City during a heat wave right after 4th of July weekend. Crazy, where she sort of set up a boudoir on the north end of a traffic island, and she did it in full public view. There was security, but it was very exposed. It was an incredibly kind of like exposed scenario. She was there all day, all night for 3 days, and it was like a living diorama performance. People could watch and walk in front of her and not interact with her, though people tried, but just sort of view it as a kind of living theater thing. And then what I decided to do was film it kind of panoptically, so like 4 cameras, high definition, all this crazy stuff, a whole damn thing. So behind her boudoir, in front of her boudoir, I had this like 16-person film crew there. It's kind of preposterous. And then I accelerated it to 60 speed, so everything she did on set that took an hour takes a minute in the film. Everything took a minute takes a second, yeah? So 72 minutes instead of 72 hours. And so it looks like she's moving normally and everything else is flying by. And it was kind of a riff on obsession, on romantic obsession. I'd scored it with my friend Todd Reynolds. It's basically a violin concerto in 7 movements where we went through, she was there for a night, then a day, then a night, then a day, then a night, then a day, then a night. So what are the different ways in which you can have obsessive love, ranging from the sort of romantic and lyrical to the kind of creepy psycho killer kind of way? Women have, in the sort of heteronormative relationship space, women have an entire ritual of gender maintenance, right? And that's what Leon's piece was about. It was about sort of exploding gender maintenance into the public sphere and sort of grotesquely articulating the sort of cult of beauty and preparation and making sure everything's just right and making sure everything's perfect and not leaving anything to chance, and all that kind of stuff by doing everything over and over again. And then as a man, I sort of took it and turned it into a piece about that kind of gaze that you have on someone you're in love with, and like, how do you speed that up and how do you articulate that and how do you remember everything?